Christmas morning smelled like cinnamon and betrayal. The tree was glowing. The fireplace was lit. My sister was smiling too hard. That was the first sign. We were gathered in my parents' living room in Boston, the same room where every holiday photo had been taken for 20 years. My father had passed 3 weeks earlier. Sudden cardiac arrest. No warning. No final conversations. Just silence where his voice used to be. My mother insisted we keep Christmas as planned. Said it was what he would have wanted. Said tradition keeps families strong. Families. The lawyer arrived at 11 sharp. No one questioned why he was invited to Christmas brunch. He carried a slim leather folder and wore the kind of expression professionals practice when they know something will shift a room permanently. My older brother stood near the window, arms folded. Calm. Controlled. My sister sat beside Mom, holding her hand like a supportive daughter in a movie scene. I took the armchair across from them. The lawyer cleared his throat. He explained that Dad updated the will 6 months ago. Minor revisions, he said. Administrative adjustments reflecting evolving family dynamics. Evolving. My brother's jaw tightened slightly, but not in surprise. My sister avoided eye contact. The lawyer began listing allocations. The house divided equally between my siblings. Investment accounts structured in trusts. Dad's business shares transitioning fully to my brother under leadership continuity clause. That hurt. I had worked in that company for 8 years. Then came the pause. The kind that stretches longer than it should. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and said my name. He informed the room that under the most recent amendment, I was no longer listed as a beneficiary in any direct inheritance category. No trust. No property. No shares. Nothing. The word nothing did not echo. It settled. My mother inhaled sharply, but did not look surprised. My sister reached for a napkin she did not need. My brother stared at the fireplace. Administrative adjustment. That was what they called it. I asked when this amendment was signed. 6 months ago. Right after a disagreement I had with my father about expanding the company into a risky development deal my brother was pushing. I remember warning Dad the numbers did not make sense. Now I was erased. Christmas lights blinked in the background while my future shifted quietly in a leather folder. The lawyer closed the document. But before anyone stood up, before the tension could dissolve into rehearsed sympathy, he cleared his throat again and said there was one more provision he needed to address. That was when the room truly changed. No one moved when he said it. One more provision. The words hovered above the coffee table like smoke. My brother straightened slightly. My sister's fingers tightened around the napkin. My mother finally looked at the lawyer, not at me. He reopened the folder slowly. He explained that my father had attached a conditional clause to the most recent amendment. A contingency tied specifically to the development project my brother had been leading. The same project I warned against. According to the document, full control of my father's business shares would remain with my brother only if the Harbor Point expansion met performance benchmarks within 12 months of Dad's passing. Revenue targets. Debt ratios. Liquidity thresholds. If those benchmarks were not met, ownership would automatically trigger a reassessment under a separate instruction letter held in escrow. Escrow. My brother spoke for the first time, saying the project was already in motion and projections were strong. He sounded rehearsed. The lawyer nodded but continued. He said my father was meticulous. He built safeguards into everything. He believed leadership should be proven, not assumed. The conditional structure reflected that belief. I felt something shift inside my chest. This was not random. Dad and I argued about Harbor Point because I ran the financial models. The numbers were tight. Too tight. Market volatility alone could collapse margins. My brother called me overly cautious. Dad listened to both of us. Apparently, he never stopped evaluating. The lawyer then added another detail. If the project underperformed and triggered reassessment, the instruction letter would designate interim oversight authority to the person my father named as financial executor for stabilization. The room went quiet again. My sister whispered something under her breath. My mother stared at the tree lights. I asked one question. Who is the financial executor? The lawyer did not answer immediately. He closed the folder again, as if measuring the air. He said the instruction letter remained sealed until either the 12-month performance window closed or early indicators showed material deviation from projected thresholds. Material deviation. In other words, failure. My brother stood abruptly and said there would be no failure. He insisted pre-sales were strong. Investors were confident. Construction was ahead of schedule. Confidence can sound convincing during Christmas brunch. But I knew something he did not. 2 weeks before Dad died, I reviewed internal cash flow sheets quietly. Harbor Point required short-term financing beyond initial projections. Vendor payments were stretched. Debt exposure rising. If Dad suspected instability, this conditional clause was not accidental. The lawyer gathered his folder, preparing to leave. Before he stepped out, he looked directly at me and said something careful. Your father believed in long-term accountability. Then he left. The door closed. Christmas music played faintly from the kitchen speaker. My brother avoided my eyes. Because if Harbor Point stumbled even slightly, this was no longer about being removed from the will. It was about who would be handed the keys when the numbers stopped cooperating. By New Year's Eve, Harbor Point was already bleeding quietly. Not publicly. The website still showed polished renderings and bold timelines. My brother posted updates about progress and investor confidence. Champagne photos. Hard hats. Smiles. But I still had contacts inside the company. People forget who trained the accounting department. A former analyst called me after hours. He said construction costs had jumped due to supply chain delays. Interest rates adjusted upward on a variable bridge loan. 2 major buyers delayed deposits citing market uncertainty. Deposits delayed means cash flow delayed. Cash flow delayed means pressure. I did not react emotionally. I asked for numbers. Ratios. Current debt exposure. Vendor payables aging reports. He hesitated but confirmed something critical. The liquidity threshold Dad built into the conditional clause was dangerously close to breach if projected sales did not convert within 90 days. 90 days. That was not 12 months. That was a ticking clock. Meanwhile, at home, the atmosphere shifted. My brother stopped calling it Dad's company and started calling it my company in conversations with Mom and my sister. Ownership changes language first. My sister began defending him aggressively whenever I asked neutral questions about the project. She said I wanted it to fail. She accused me of circling like a vulture. They still believed I had been cut out completely. They forgot about the sealed letter. One afternoon, I received an official email from the company's CFO requesting clarification on a financial modeling template I originally built years ago. The template was still being used for Harbor Point projections. They were scrambling. That night, my brother called unexpectedly. His voice was controlled but strained. He asked if I would consult temporarily to refine forecasting models. Just informal input. Family support. Family. Interesting word after Christmas. I asked whether the liquidity ratio had slipped below projected range. He paused too long. Then he said market adjustments were normal. Normal adjustments do not trigger conditional clauses. I declined the consultation but offered one piece of advice. Protect cash. Reduce exposure. Slow expansion. He did not like that. 3 weeks later, a construction subcontractor filed a notice of delayed payment. It was small. Routine. But filings are public. Public filings attract attention. Investors began asking sharper questions. And then it happened. An internal report flagged that projected revenue for Q1 would fall short of Dad's performance benchmark by nearly 12%. 12%. The conditional clause required strict adherence. Material deviation. The phrase echoed. The board scheduled an emergency review meeting. The same lawyer would attend. And if Harbor Point officially crossed the line my father defined, the sealed instruction letter would no longer stay sealed. Christmas was when they erased me. Now winter was tightening around Harbor Point. And I had a feeling my father planned this far more carefully than anyone realized. The emergency review meeting was scheduled for a Monday morning at 10. Snow lined the sidewalks outside the company headquarters. The kind of heavy Boston snow that muffles sound and makes everything feel suspended. Inside, nothing felt suspended. The boardroom was tense before I even walked in. Technically, I was no longer a shareholder. My name had been removed from the will. My authority erased. But as former CFO and architect of the company's financial infrastructure, I was invited to observe. Observe. My brother stood at the front of the room beside a large screen displaying Harbor Point projections. He looked sharper than usual. Controlled. Determined. The CFO began presenting updated numbers. Construction costs had increased by 18% since initial forecast. Interest expenses on short-term financing rose faster than modeled. Pre-sale conversions slowed by nearly 20%. The liquidity ratio Dad embedded into the conditional clause required a minimum threshold to be maintained quarterly. They were below it. Not dramatically, but clearly. The room went quiet as the CFO confirmed it. Material deviation from projected benchmark. There it was. My brother immediately reframed it as temporary fluctuation. He cited strong spring demand forecasts. Claimed pending contracts would close soon. The lawyer, seated near the end of the table, asked a single question. Can you guarantee recovery within the required time frame outlined in the amendment? Guarantee. My brother did not answer directly. He pivoted to optimism. Optimism does not satisfy legal clauses. The lawyer opened his leather folder slowly. The same folder from Christmas morning. He explained that under the terms of the amendment, once deviation crossed the defined threshold, the sealed instruction letter must be reviewed by the board within 72 hours. 72 hours. My sister shifted in her chair. My mother, invited as symbolic family presence, looked pale. The lawyer added that the instruction letter would not necessarily reverse ownership immediately. It would outline corrective authority measures designed by my father to stabilize the company if leadership performance failed to meet expectations. Corrective authority. My brother's jaw tightened. The meeting adjourned with official confirmation of deviation recorded in minutes. That recording triggered the clause. As everyone stood, my brother approached me quietly. He asked if I was satisfied. Satisfied was not the word. This was not revenge. This was mathematics. He accused me of influencing internal reporting, of positioning myself for this moment. I reminded him calmly that I had not touched a single ledger since Christmas. Numbers moved on their own. By Wednesday afternoon, the board would reconvene to open the instruction letter. And whatever my father wrote inside that sealed envelope would redefine who actually controlled Harbor Point. They kicked me out of the will at Christmas. But Dad never did anything without layers. And something tells me I was never as erased as they believed. 72 hours feels different when you are waiting to see if your power survives. By Wednesday afternoon, the boardroom was full again. No holiday decorations this time. No forced warmth. Just legal pads, financial binders, and tension thick enough to feel in your throat. The lawyer placed the sealed instruction letter on the table. My father's signature stretched across the back flap. Dated 2 weeks after our last argument. The lawyer broke the seal carefully. Paper unfolded. Everyone leaned forward without meaning to. He began reading. The letter stated that if Harbor Point failed to meet defined liquidity and revenue thresholds within the first performance quarter, interim financial oversight would transfer immediately to a stabilization executor appointed directly by my father. That executor would hold authority to pause expansion spending, renegotiate financing, restructure debt exposure, and override executive decisions deemed financially reckless. Override executive decisions. My brother exhaled sharply. The lawyer continued. The stabilization executor would retain this authority until the project returned to compliance benchmarks for 2 consecutive quarters. Then came the line that shifted the room completely. The appointed stabilization executor is my daughter. My name filled the silence. No one moved. My sister looked at my brother as if she misheard. My mother's hand gripped the edge of the table. My brother's face drained slowly of color. The lawyer finished reading. Effective immediately upon confirmed deviation, full financial oversight of Harbor Point transitions to her authority under board supervision. Effective immediately. That meant now. Not after discussion. Not after debate. Now. The board members began murmuring quietly. Some nodded. They had seen the numbers. They knew the exposure was real. My brother stood. He argued that this was unnecessary. That temporary volatility did not justify stripping operational control. He said Dad trusted him to lead. The lawyer corrected him calmly. Your father trusted performance metrics, not sentiment. All eyes shifted to me. I felt the weight of it, but not panic. I knew the numbers. I built the framework they were still using. The board chair asked if I was prepared to assume stabilization authority. I answered clearly. Yes. The vote was procedural. Unanimous. Just like that, oversight transferred. My brother no longer had unilateral control over Harbor Point. Every major financial decision would require my approval. He once said I was too cautious. Now caution was legally required. As the meeting adjourned, he did not look at me. He walked out first. At Christmas, they thought removing my name from the will removed my influence. But Dad did not erase me. He positioned me. And now the project my brother risked everything on sat under my supervision. This was not inheritance. This was accountability. And Harbor Point was about to face its first real audit. The first thing I did was freeze spending. Not dramatically. Not publicly. Quietly. All discretionary expansion payments paused pending review. Vendor contracts re-examined line by line. Bridge loan terms analyzed under worst-case rate projections. Cash flow stress tested against delayed pre-sales. Within 48 hours, resistance surfaced. My brother requested emergency approval to release funds to a marketing firm pushing aggressive pre-sale campaigns. He argued visibility would restore investor confidence. Visibility does not repair leverage ratios. I denied the request. Instead, I initiated direct calls with primary lenders. Calm conversations. Transparent disclosure. I positioned the shift in oversight as a proactive stabilization measure rather than internal conflict. Lenders prefer control to chaos. Then something unexpected surfaced. During debt review, I found an accelerated clause buried in a secondary financing agreement. If revenue fell below a specific threshold for 2 consecutive months, the lender could demand partial repayment immediately. That threshold was dangerously close. No one had flagged it in the board presentation. I requested internal clarification. The CFO hesitated before admitting the clause had been considered unlikely to trigger. My brother approved the terms last summer to secure faster capital. High-risk capital. The kind Dad warned against. If that clause activated, Harbor Point would not just be unstable. It would be cornered. I scheduled a closed-door meeting with the lender before they could act first. Preemptive negotiation. Structured reassurance. Revised repayment scheduling under monitored oversight. They agreed to hold enforcement for 30 days. 30 days. A countdown layered beneath the first. When my brother learned about the clause, his composure fractured for the first time. He accused the CFO of incompetence. He accused me of exaggerating danger to justify authority. I placed the contract on the table. Highlighted. Signed under his name. Silence followed. That night, I stayed late reviewing revised projections alone in the boardroom. Snow fell again outside the windows. Harbor Point's skyline render glowed on the presentation screen, polished and confident. But beneath that polished surface was fragility. If I failed to stabilize this within 30 days, the lender could force restructuring severe enough to strip family ownership entirely. Not just his control. All of it. I finally understood why Dad built layers into the will. He did not just protect assets. He tested judgment. The next morning, I issued my most aggressive directive yet. Suspend all new unit releases. Shift focus entirely to closing existing contracts. Cut executive compensation temporarily to preserve liquidity. Including my brother's. The board approved. Barely. He stared at me across the table with something I had not seen before. Not anger. Fear. Because this was no longer about rivalry. If Harbor Point collapsed, the family name attached to it would collapse too. And with only 28 days left before the lender's clause reactivated, failure was no longer theoretical. It was measurable. And ticking. 28 days became 20. Closing existing contracts sounded simple on paper. In reality, It meant confronting buyers who were hesitating in a volatile market. I began calling them personally, not with sales language, with data. I walked them through revised construction timelines, updated cost controls, lender cooperation agreements. I showed them stabilization measures already implemented. Transparency replaced projection. 3 buyers recommitted within the first week. 2 still delayed. Liquidity inched upward, but not enough to feel safe. Meanwhile, internal pressure intensified. Executive compensation cuts hit harder than expected. My brother had leveraged personal assets, assuming Harbor Point distributions would continue uninterrupted. Without them, his private cash flow tightened. One evening, he entered my office without knocking. He said I was dismantling momentum. That fear-driven leadership would scare investors. He argued that bold moves built empires. Empires built on unstable debt collapse faster. I asked him one direct question. Did you read every financing clause before signing last summer? He looked away. That answer told me enough. Days later, another complication surfaced. A subcontractor threatened to file a lien over delayed payment. If filed, it would become public record immediately. Public record would trigger investor panic. Panic could push lenders to reconsider their 30-day hold. I authorized partial payment from reserve funds despite tightening margins. Not ideal. Necessary. We were walking a narrow bridge. Then came the email that froze the room. One of the 2 remaining major buyers withdrew entirely. Deposit refundable under a contingency clause tied to delayed completion projections. Projected revenue dropped again, below the accelerated lender threshold. Technically, the clause could activate now. I contacted the lender within the hour. Preemptive disclosure again. I presented updated cash flow schedules reflecting recent recommitments and revised payment staging. I argued that withdrawal did not represent structural failure, only timeline adjustment. They listened. They did not promise. After the call, the board convened urgently. If the lender enforced the clause, partial repayment demand would exceed available liquidity. Emergency capital injection would be required. From investors. Or family. My brother suggested asking Mom to leverage her personal trust assets. The room went cold. Dad built those trusts to protect her long-term stability. I said no. We would not gamble her security to rescue a projection error. Silence followed. For the first time, several board members sided openly with me. Authority was no longer symbolic. It was trusted. That night, as I reviewed updated projections alone again, I saw a narrow pathway. If we could close just 1 additional unit within 10 days, liquidity would rebound above the enforcement threshold. 1 unit. 10 days. The clock showed 12 remaining before lender review. At Christmas, they removed my name from the inheritance. Now the entire family legacy balanced on a closing signature I had to secure. And failure would not just humiliate my brother. It would prove him right about me all along. 10 days became 5. The buyer I targeted was a venture capitalist relocating from New York. He liked Harbor Point's design, but distrusted the headlines surrounding market volatility. His hesitation was logical. So I met him in person. No glossy pitch deck. No exaggerated promises. I brought audited numbers. Updated lender correspondence. Revised cash flow projections reflecting cost containment and debt renegotiation. I showed him where we cut executive compensation. Where we paused expansion. Where risk had been reduced line by line. He asked one question that mattered. Why should I believe this project will not collapse in 6 months? I answered honestly. Because I am the one stopping it from doing exactly that. Silence followed. Then negotiation began. Price adjusted slightly. Closing timeline accelerated. Deposit structured in stages, but large enough to push liquidity safely above the enforcement threshold. When he signed, I felt the shift immediately. Not relief. Control. The funds cleared within 48 hours. Liquidity rose above the lender's trigger point. Documentation sent. Ratios updated. Compliance restored. The lender confirmed in writing that enforcement action would not proceed. 30 days ended without collapse. At the final board meeting of the quarter, the numbers told a different story than Christmas had promised. Harbor Point was not booming. It was stable. Stability wins longer than ego. The lawyer attended again. He reviewed the clause Dad embedded in the will. Since compliance benchmarks were restored, stabilization oversight would continue until 2 consecutive quarters confirmed sustained performance. But he added something else. My father included a final instruction beneath that clause. If the appointed stabilization executor successfully restored compliance within the first enforcement window, permanent equity in Harbor Point would transfer proportionally to reflect risk mitigation authority exercised. Proportionally. My share would not disappear after stabilization. It would expand. My brother sat very still as the numbers were recalculated. He had pushed to remove me from the inheritance. Dad had already accounted for that. By the end of the meeting, my position in the company was no longer temporary oversight. It was secured ownership. Later that evening, my brother approached me privately. He did not argue. He admitted he confused confidence with competence. He believed boldness meant leadership. He thought removing me protected his authority. Instead, it exposed it. I told him something simple. Dad did not punish either of us. He tested us. Christmas morning felt like betrayal. Now I understood it was a setup. They kicked me out of the will in front of the tree lights and holiday music. But Dad knew exactly where to place me. Not at the table for gifts. At the table where decisions are made. And this time, my name was not crossed out. It was written into the foundation. If this story resonates you, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and press the bell icon so you don't miss any of these interesting payback and betrayal stories. See you in the next one.